The first time I met my mother-in-law, she handed me a gift bag. Inside was a book titled, How to Be a Wife, a guide for women who were raised wrong. I laughed, thinking it was a joke, until she said, "Your people just don't know how to keep a home." My husband chuckled and said, "She just tells it like it is." I sat through dinner in silence, but months later, when she needed a place to stay, I gave her a room with cameras. I should have known from the beginning that Barbara was going to be a problem. Not the annoying kind of problem. The kind that sees you as less than. The kind that smiles while she says something cruel and then pretends like you're too sensitive if it hurts. It was August 2021 when Dean first took me to meet her. We'd just gotten married that July at the courthouse in Dayton, Ohio. Just the two of us and a witness. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't romantic. But it was what Dean wanted. I didn't have family nearby, and he said he didn't care much for weddings. Said they were a waste of time and money. So I agreed. But a few weeks after we signed those papers, he said we should have dinner at his mom's place. "She wants to meet you," he told me. "She's a little blunt, but she's harmless." That was the first time I heard that word, blunt, used to cover up what I now know was just straight-up nastiness. Barbara lived alone in a nice two-story home in Kettering, not far from the Mire. She kept it clean, too clean, like no one really lived there. When we got there, she barely looked at me. Just gave me this once-over, like she was judging me from head to toe. Then she smiled tight and said, "So you're the girl?" Not Dean's wife. Not even my name. Just the girl. I should have turned around and walked out. Dinner was pork roast, green beans, and mashed potatoes. She made everything from scratch. She told me that 3 times. I don't do frozen meals. Everything I make is fresh. I was raised right, she said, with that little smirk. I nodded and smiled, and tried to stay polite. I thought maybe she was nervous, maybe she just didn't know how to talk to new people. But the whole night, she kept throwing these little lines out. "Dean always liked his women quiet. I'm sure you'll learn how to cook once you settle down." Back in my day, we didn't have time for all this phone scrolling nonsense. We cleaned. We made dinner. We kept our men happy. Dean never corrected her. He just smiled, laughed here and there, acted like it was all normal. And then after dinner, she reached under the table and pulled out a gift bag. Pink, shiny, with a little bow. I thought maybe she was trying. Maybe she was making an effort to welcome me. I said thank you and opened it with a smile. Inside was a book. A real, printed book. Not a notebook or a journal. The title slapped me across the face. How to Be a Wife, a guide for women who were raised wrong. I froze. I stared at it. Thought it had to be a joke. But when I looked up, she was sipping her wine, looking at me with that smug little grin. I forced a laugh. "Is this a joke?" she said. "Oh, honey, no. Your people just don't know how to keep a home. You'll learn." Dean laughed. He actually laughed and said, "She just tells it like it is." I looked at him, waiting for something, waiting for him to say, "That's not okay," or "Mom, don't talk like that." But he didn't. He went back to eating like nothing happened. That was the moment something in me changed. I didn't fight. I didn't speak up. I finished my plate. I smiled through dessert. I said thank you when we left. I kissed Dean goodnight. But in the back of my mind, I decided something. You don't come for me like that and walk away clean. I didn't grow up with a lot. I was raised by my aunt in a small house outside of Lima. We had hand-me-downs and TV dinners and nights when the heater didn't work. But we had love. We had respect. And we never made people feel small just because they were different. Barbara thought she had me figured out. She thought I was too quiet, too polite, too weak. She thought I'd take the hits and just smile through them. She was wrong. It took months. But I waited. And when her perfect little world cracked. When she called Dean crying because she slipped on the ice outside her house and couldn't manage the stairs anymore, I opened our door to her. I gave her the guest room. I helped carry her bags inside. I made her tea. And I installed cameras. Not in the bathroom. Not in her room. But in the common areas. The kitchen. the living room, the hallway. I told Dean it was for safety. What if she falls again?
I said.
We need to make sure she's okay. He agreed. Barbara moved in with all her snide comments and suggestions. She told me I didn't vacuum right.
Said my food was too salty.
Said I looked tired and should try makeup for Dean's sake. She called my best friend a loudmouth and my brother lazy. But I stayed quiet. And the cameras recorded everything. I watched. I listened. I waited. I made sure Dean saw it too. Every comment. Every sneer. Every cruel thing she said when he wasn't in the room. I wasn't just planning revenge. I was building a case. The first few weeks she lived with us, Dean defended her like his life depended on it. She's just old-fashioned. She doesn't mean it. She's been through a lot. Every excuse in the book. I didn't argue. I let him have his excuses. But every time she told me I was spoiled or lazy or said, "In my house, this would never fly," I just nodded and smiled. The cameras picked up more than just words. They caught her going through my mail. They caught her opening the cabinets in our bedroom when we were at work. They caught her taking photos of my journals. They caught her whispering on the phone to someone, talking trash about me, saying things like, "She's not good enough for Dean. I give it 6 months." I didn't say anything. Not yet. But then, one day, while I was out at work and Dean was visiting his friend in Troy, she forgot the cameras were there. She invited someone over.
A man.
Maybe in his late 50s.
Tall.
White beard. Drove a black Ford. He stayed for an hour. They sat in the living room, drank wine, laughed. She called him Tommy. The cameras caught everything. He asked her how she was doing living with us. She said, "It's miserable. That girl walks around like she owns the place. I give her 6 more months, and Dean will come running home to me." Then she laughed and said something that made my stomach turn. I already started nudging him. Told him he deserves better. And you know what? He's starting to see it. He doesn't even like her cooking anymore. Just a matter of time. I watched that clip 3 times. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just a mean mother-in-law. She was trying to sabotage my marriage. On purpose. With planning. She was manipulating Dean. Planting seeds. And I was just letting it happen. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up watching the footage. I made a folder. Labeled every video. I copied them to a flash drive. The next morning, Dean came into the kitchen and said, "Mom says you were rude to her again yesterday. Did you really tell her to stop doing laundry?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at him, dead in the eye, and said, "We need to talk." I took out the flash drive. I said, "You need to watch this. Every minute.
No skipping.
Just watch." He didn't want to. Said I was being dramatic. Said I should just let it go. But I didn't back down this time. "Dean, you either watch this or you leave." He saw I was serious. So he watched. Every clip. Every insult. Every lie. Every sneaky little move. He didn't say anything for a long time. When it was over, he looked like someone had punched him. I
didn't know," he said.
She told me. I nodded.
"Yeah.
I know what she told you." He didn't speak to his mom for 3 days. And then, on the 4th day, something happened I didn't expect. Barbara found the flash drive. And everything exploded. I still don't know how she found it. Maybe Dean left it out. Maybe she was snooping again. But on that Thursday morning, I came back from the grocery store and found her sitting at the kitchen table with the flash drive in her hand. She didn't look mad. She looked calm, too calm. She tapped it against the table like it was a pen. Then she said, "So this is what you've been doing? Spying." I didn't answer. I was shaking, but I hid it. She smiled, stood up, and walked over to me slow. "You think you're clever? Recording me? Digging into things that don't concern you." "They concern me when you're in my house, plotting to ruin my marriage," I said. She didn't flinch, just nodded like she was proud of herself. "He wouldn't even be married to you if it weren't for me." I told him to settle down. "I just didn't think he'd pick you." "You're sick," I said. She leaned in, and her voice dropped. You think Dean will forgive you for spying on his mother? For recording her? For invading her privacy? I've known that boy his whole life. You've known him what?
A year?
Then she said something I'll never forget. I survived worse women than you. You'll be gone by Christmas. She dropped the flash drive in my hand and walked back to her room like nothing happened. That night, Dean came home, and she was all tears and heartbreak. Told him I'd been violating her, that I was mentally unstable and paranoid.
Dean didn't say much.
But something shifted in him. He stopped hugging me at night, stopped making coffee in the mornings, stopped asking me how my day was. He was slipping away. She was getting to him again. So I went deeper. I called Tommy, that man she had over. I reverse searched his license plate from the camera footage. Found his name, Thomas O'Hara.
Divorced.
Retired. Used to work with Barbara back in the 90s at a finance office. I pretended to be an old coworker. Said I was planning a surprise for Barbara's birthday and wanted to get in touch with old friends. He laughed and said, "Still the same Barbara. Always scheming." Then he said, "Last time I saw her, she was ranting about some trust fund thing. Said she was going to make sure her son got all her assets and not the wife." I told her, "That's none of your business, but you know Barb." I froze. Trust fund? Dean didn't have one. At least, not that he knew of. But apparently Barbara did. That's when the real story started to unravel. I didn't tell Dean about what Tommy said. Not yet. I needed proof first. So I started digging. I called an old friend of mine from high school, Sarah, who worked at a small law office in Beaver Creek. She wasn't a lawyer, but she did clerical work and knew how to look things up. I told her everything, piece by piece. She was stunned. She said, "If there's a trust or will involved and Dean's name is on it, it might be recorded somewhere if any legal prep was done. Let me see what I can find." 2 days later, she called me at lunch. "Okay," she said, "this might be nothing, but your mother-in-law filed paperwork last year to establish a living trust. Her son is the sole beneficiary, and here's the kicker. There's a clause that gives her full control over all disbursements unless Dean is legally married and not divorced." I sat there in my car, not moving.
Wait.
"So, she gets to decide if he gets anything unless he's married." "Yes," Sarah said. "But if he gets divorced, she gets control again." I suddenly understood everything. Barbara wanted control. Dean getting married, especially to me, meant she couldn't dangle that trust over his head anymore. But if she convinced him to divorce me, that control would go back to her. It wasn't about who I was. It was about power. She didn't hate me. She hated losing leverage. I had to tell Dean. But I couldn't just go to him with more words. He'd already started pulling away. Barbara had been in his ear every day, playing the victim, telling him I was spying, manipulating him. He was slipping and fast. So I made a plan. I called Sarah again and asked her for copies of the trust paperwork. She said she couldn't give me everything, but she could summarize the filing and draft a basic report. I took that, printed it, and slid it into a folder labeled Household Budget. Then I waited. I left the folder in our office, half buried under some junk mail. I knew Dean would eventually see it. He always cleaned the office on Sundays. Sure enough, Sunday night came, and Dean walked into the living room holding the folder. "What's this?" he asked. I shrugged. "Just paperwork." He opened it, flipped through. Then he stopped. He stared at the trust summary. He looked up. "Where did you get this?" "Doesn't matter," I said. "What matters is your mom's been using money to control your life. And I think she's trying to get you to leave me so she can take that control back." He didn't say a word. He just stood there. Later that night, he went to talk to her. They were in her room for almost an hour. I sat in the hallway with my back against the wall, listening. She screamed. She cried. She said, "She's poisoning you against me." He said, "I just want the truth, Mom." She screamed louder. Then something shattered. The door flew open and Barbara stormed past me, straight into the garage. Dean followed her, yelling. I heard the garage door open. Then the engine of her car. She backed out so fast she nearly hit the trash bins. She was gone. Barbara didn't come back that night. Or the next. Dean didn't say much for a while. He was quiet.
Distant.
Part of me thought that maybe he'd follow her. That he'd take her side in the end. But instead, something in him finally snapped open. "She's been doing this my whole life," he said one night, sitting at the edge of our bed. "Making me choose. Making me feel like everything I had was because of her. Even when she hated me, she made me feel like I owed her." I sat next to him. "You don't owe her anything." He nodded. I just didn't want to believe it. 2 weeks later, he got a call from Barbara's lawyer. She'd changed the trust. Dean was cut out. No explanation. No warning. She left everything to a charity for traditional family values. It was petty, cruel, but it was done. Dean didn't fight it. He just stared at the letter and said, "Good. Now I don't owe her a damn thing." I wish that was where it ended. But it wasn't. Barbara wasn't done. She started calling his friends, telling them I was manipulative, that I'd driven a wedge between her and her son. She even told people I was abusive. Then she filed a noise complaint against our home. Said we were disturbing her peace, even though she hadn't lived here for weeks. The cops came. Nothing came of it, but she kept coming. Dean blocked her number, blocked her on social media. So did I. And then she showed up at my job. I work at a dental office. Front desk. She walked in like she had an appointment. I stood up and said, "You can't be here." She smiled at me, sweet, fake, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "I just wanted to meet the woman who ruined my family." I asked her to leave. She wouldn't. So I called the police. That got her out. But my manager pulled me into the back and said, "We need to talk about boundaries." It was humiliating. Barbara cost me my peace, my trust, nearly my marriage. And that was when I finally did what I swore I never would. I sent the footage, every clip, to every single person in her church group, to her coworkers, to her sisters, to the neighbor who always waved at her like she was a saint. They saw her for who she really was, heard the things she said, saw the man in her house, heard her call me filth. It spread fast. She lost her volunteer spot at the church. Her sisters stopped calling. The neighbors stopped waving. Dean and I moved out of state 3 months later. New house. New start. We still have cameras at our home. Not because we're scared. Because now we know, when someone shows you who they are, you better pay attention. I'm not proud of how far I went.
Spying. Digging.
Sending that footage. But I'm also not sorry. Sometimes, to protect what's yours, you have to fight like hell. And sometimes, revenge is just making sure they never get the last word again.